Welcome to Thinking Tackle. I'm Adam Penning. Now let me take you back in time. The date, October 1984. The magazine, The Angling Times, and one of the most famous photographs of a carp that was ever produced. The fish in question, basil, probably the most famous carp, certainly of modern times. The angler, Richie McDonald, and the lake, right here, Yateley North Lake, which from that point on left its mark on modern carp fishing. I've never been here before, and because it is such a famous place, it's somewhere I've always wanted to come and fish. The fishing has never been easy. Historically, it's been very low stock. The fish have grown very big. It's very weedy. The guest I've got with me is perfect for catching carp in that kind of environment. He's a master of it, and he's also been involved in some of the recent history of Yateley North Lake, as it's actually been reborn from what it used to be. In the old days, it maybe had 6 or 7 fish. Now there's a new generation of fish which have grown almost as big as the famous basil did. So it's a very exciting one. It's going to be a challenge. We could easily blank. We might have bitten off more than we can chew. It's a tough venue, but we're going to introduce you to this lake. You can all have a good look at it, see how we fish it, and let's see what we get. Mr. Carp.
Mr. Penning, good
Nice
to see
you, mate.
How's things?
Very good, thanks,
Good.
fella. It's humid, isn't it?
It is warm, very warm.
Most of you guys will know Simon Scott from previous shows and his exploits with me on Farlows, Blue Pool, shows like that. Anyone who hasn't seen Simon before, you're in for a bit of a treat. He's very entertaining and he's also very good at catching carp. Renowned in the fishery field as a consultant, as a fish farmer. You're a scientist, a lecturer, and a well-travelled expert carp angler, and a good mate of mine. So anyone who hasn't seen Simon, that's a bit about him. We're at the Yateley North Lake, so I mean, it's iconic.
Yeah, a very famous lake indeed, Adam. It's a very special spot. As a youngster getting into carp fishing, I was reading stories in Rob Maylin's books about this place, his guest chapters, and then he went on to fish here himself. And
well, there was an actual book named after it.
Basil's Bush. Yeah, very famous lake, and I've had a lot to do with it as well, because after the big, very famous Yateley carp, Basil died. I was involved in the drain down.
Before we get to that, there's actually a headstone down there. Is that where Basil's resting?
Right. Basil is buried.
The most famous carp deserved a proper grave, I suppose.
Yeah, a real big special carp. And you know, as a kid, as I say, I read stories about Basil and thought I'd like to fish.
Really inspired you?
Yeah. It's a real cornerstone of British carp fishing. The Yateley complex is, is known throughout the carp fishing world. Anglers know where Yateley is. It's a big place.
Yeah, and also I think it's fair to say, probably or arguably, the best looking carp that the country's ever produced. It's up there, isn't it? It was a stunning fish, but times have moved on. What happened?
Well, the lake was drained after Basil had died. The lake was drained, and all the water was pumped out through 6-inch pipes into the river through a series of cages. The old stock were removed and relocated into one of the other lakes on the complex where they could be retrieved later.
Right.
A lot of tree work was done. A lot of
You're doing this, I take it.
Myself and the groups of students and the guys at RMC at the time were doing it, and then subsequently the lake's been restocked. Some of the old fish going back in.
Right.
Additionally, some of the Sutton strain fish that I'd spawned have come back in here.
Right.
And I did a netting job at the Blue Pool where we fished and made the programme last year, and we took about 70 carp out of there and moved them here. Those fish now have become some of the big ones. So we netted commons, a couple of commons that were sort of 29, 30 pounders, lovely big long fish, and they've grown on to become 40s now.
Wow, okay. So not only have you netted them, but knowing your Blue Pool record, you probably caught them on rod and line as well.
No, I don't think I did either of those, but I've caught them in a net, so I can tick them off and say I've done that.
For now, though.
For now.
Nice to have them on.
I'd quite like to meet them again, yeah.
So 2 40-pound commons. I think there's 1 40-pound mirror as well.
I believe so, yeah. And a good load of 30s and some real cracking 20-pound fish. So there's a nice stock, maybe 140 fish thereabouts, I understand.
But in a very fragmented and extremely weedy and difficult lake to approach. I mean, for a TV show where we need to catch fish, we might have bitten off more than we can chew here.
Yeah, I think we've definitely gone for it.
Well, we like a challenge.
The lake's only done 1 fish, I believe, in the last week.
Right. Yeah.
So if we can catch one in 3 or 4 days for the cameras, that would be quite something. But you'll catch one. Well, and I can take the pictures.
I know you will. Well, we're properly up against it, but going down to Thorpe Lee or the South Lake or something isn't really Simon's style. He's a big fish angler by nature and thrives on a challenge. So I can see you've got one in front of you. It looks more like Wembley than a carp lake. So specialised fishing. The guys watching this at home are going to be wondering how do you cope with fishing in weed? What do you do? I know you're going to show some of that. The other thing to mention is that we're fishing on completely opposite sides of the lake. It's not social at all, unfortunately, but we've both gone where we've seen carp. There was a group here in front of you last night.
Yeah, indeed.
And the same on the opposite side for me. So we've got fishing. Nothing's happened so far.
No.
I've had my rods wound in for a little while, so I'm going to go back and check some spots I've been baiting. Let's look in here. There's fish about.
Yeah, definitely. They've been coming through. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll catch you later on.
Yeah,
Good
give
luck.
us a shout if you get one.
Be lucky.
Cheers, Adam.
Well, I'm back at camp, and I haven't got any rods out at the moment, but I've just been up the margin to my right to check a couple of spots, and fantastically, we've got fish visiting. They're not really confident at the moment. They're ghosting over the spot. And I found a new spot which is just a little bit further up, which looks equally good. Saw a fish come over it almost straight away, so I baited that as well now, using the extending spoon. Managed to poke it through the herbage. One of them's 6 foot rod spot, the other one you could fish more conventionally, but they're both perfectly safe. They're not snaggy or anything, they're just a little bit hard to get to in terms of bankside herbage, but both look good to do a bite. I really fancy my chances now, feel quite fired up. So I've put some hemp and some maples, which I've got as a little mixture in a bucket down on those spots. Interestingly, 2 of the spots have got a branch line across the middle of them, which indicates that they started their life as a rubbing spot. There's a fish flank on them to clean themselves. Gradually that'll open up and become a big glow area, which is what we've got. They're fantastic spots to feed fish on. So really feel good for a chance maybe later on today. So I'm going to drink this, get my energy back, and I'm going to go and put a rod in.
So here I am on my first swim on the North Lake. The reason I picked this area is that I've seen a fair few fish sitting in the weed bed, particularly out to my left. It's a very, very weedy area, as you can see. It's like a football pitch, but there's obviously a lot of fish here now. I think they're sort of resting up and sunbathing predominantly, but obviously you've got a fish where you see the fish. It's very nice to pick the most comfortable swim, but that doesn't necessarily give you the best chance of a bite. And as we've already mentioned, we're up against it. We've got to try and catch one. So I've got my left-hand rod in this spot out here, which is a big clear, well I say big, it's about the size of a brolly, clear area, and I've had a little couple of casts in there and it's landing clean on the bottom. When I drag a rig back, I'm not picking up weeds. I'm confident that that's one good spot to fish, and my right-hand rod, I'm fishing out these clear holes in the weed. Because it's so weedy, it's really important to fish locked up tight so that the rods can only give a couple of foot of line and that's it, so the fish can't charge off. And I'm using drop-off leads, really, really important, so that once we're in contact with the fish, the leads shed and it gives you every chance of getting the fish back through this heavy weed growth. Now at the moment, as I say, the fish are sitting up in the weed. I'm going to give this a couple of hours. If things don't look like they're going to happen, then I'll probably go for a bit of a cruise around and see if there's a better angle of attack, maybe a better option for presenting a bait, but it's a good starting point, and as I say, I'm on some fish for now.
That was seriously exciting. I've got one really good fish, 25 pound probably, feeding at my feet in 2 feet of water on maples and hemp seed. I'm going to get a rod sorted. It's an up close and personal situation, 6 foot stalking rod. Get in there and see if we can bag him. Action stations. I've got a 6 foot rod all made up, little tiny rig with a Tigernut on it, balanced, landing net, bit of bait and a spoon. That's all I need. If it takes 2 or 3 hours, I don't care. There's a good fish feed in there, so I'm going to go in as quietly as I can, lower the bait onto the spot, slacken the line, sit back and wait, and hopefully we'll nail the carp.
Okay, so it's time to make a move. Although I think this was a good first choice, I now think that possibly a move onto the other side of this bay would be better. I've had fish this morning coming through this really thick weed and dropping on the spot, and I definitely had a fish feeding over my bait. Not much bait out there. I'm disappointed not to get a pickup, but my line lay is probably quite poor because the line's coming in then dropping very steeply onto quite a small spot. I think if I fish the other side of the bay, there's a little less weed over there and I can fish up to the thick weed without coming over it. The shadow from the trees on the other side there has obviously created a darker area of water, and that's prohibited the weed growth. So I figure that's going to be a better area to try. Certainly gives me better line lay, and I think I feel more confident around there. So I'm going to pack up, get a bit sweaty, push the barrow around the other side and give it a go for the night. Okay, so that's everything set in a new swim. It's been a story today about this stuff and lots of it. Hopefully on this side of the bay I've got a better line layout to the spots I'm fishing, with a left-hand rod tight to the weed over there where I'd seen fish feeding this morning, and this right-hand rod's fishing down to the right up against the weed. Both rods have gone in nice and clean, both rods have given me a donk and have hit the bottom, so I'm pretty confident with the presentation. The line lay's much better, so hopefully now the traps are set. Fingers crossed.
The end of day one, it's been a really humid, clammy kind of day, and it's just beginning to freshen a bit from the west. Simon's moved, I'm about to move. We've both been on fish, but it's a matter of fine-tuning your approach as the session progresses. It's all about ticking the boxes, ringing the changes and reacting to what's happening around you. Yes, there are fish in front of me, but today I've spotted a golden opportunity in the next swim up, which is only 10 yards away. But I'm going to move everything just up there, which will allow me to position one rod only, really. It's a tiny little hole, which I'll show you in a moment, which will give me a perfect opportunity to fish where I've seen these fish feeding earlier. I'll show you where that is now. This is the spot, probably not much of a swim you're thinking, to move everything for the night just to fish one rod. It's overhanging, you can't really cast, there's nowhere to cast to anyway. It's a tiny little channel between the bank and two little tiny islands. I've been watching fish coming through this gap throughout the day. They were there this morning, they've been tenting up in the weed around the spot, and there's a lovely little gravel area just through there which I'm going to position one rod on for the night. So I'm going to move everything in here. I'm very confident this spot's going to do me a bite. I'm going to stick my neck out. I'll see you in the morning with a carp. Good morning. Carpless at the moment. This is the time. The time is now, and all the traps are perfectly set. Assuming I haven't been turned over in the night, but it was very quiet, no liners, didn't hear any fish crash, but really been waiting for this time, the dawn period. It's when the bites have been coming over the last couple of months. Usually on most lakes during the summer, that's the time. So I'm here with a cup of tea. It's chilly, the weather's changed quite a lot, but it feels good, and the dawn vigil is always an exciting time to be up. And I'm just going to sit here by this rod that's flicked up against the side of this island. It's my banker spot. Let's see what happens. Well, I've had a single tigernut in a spot right in the edge here. It's actually been down there for quite a while. Not seen a fish here since yesterday. I was just peering over the bush watching what was going on. A fish came in, just caught a glimpse of his tail, and he must have hooked himself straight away, and he's just darted into the weed in front of me. He's not too far out, you can see the weed bed moving back towards me. I'm on my trusty little 6-foot war rod for up close and personal situations. I'm hoping and praying the fish is still on. There's a lot of weed drifting towards me. And this little 6-foot rod is a bit undergunned for towing half a tonne of weed, but half a tonne of weed and hopefully a carp. That was so exciting, so instant, out of nothing. I was just contemplating a move. You know, the swim looked dead, I've hardly seen a fish. And then this just bolted off on against a really tight clutch. I just couldn't stop it, straight into the weed. And as soon as he hit that wall of weed, he stopped, put the brakes on. So there's the leader. Is he going to be still there? Oh, come on. I think, I hope, try and get the net right under the whole thing. And let's see what we've got. Come on. Come on. I don't know whether I've got a fish or not. I'm going to open up the clutch just in case he's on and he goes crazy. Lay the rod down, try and strip this weed away. Yes, there's still a fish here. Come on. Oh, I've got him in the net and all the weed. Look at that. Unbelievable. There's no way I can even begin to lift the net with all this. Well, you can see there, look, there's the back of a carp in the net, safely in the net. A mid 50 pound of weed probably, maybe 100 pound. I've got to clear some of this away from the draw cord so I can even think about lifting the net. I've got a wet muddy foot, but I don't care, I've got a carp. Well, there you go, guys. I've got to sort this mess out, but that is a carp in the net, and it's one that's come whilst I felt I was staring defeat in the face. All my optimism of last night was pretty much crushed, and the fish seemed to have disappeared. Anyway, I've been stood by this tree all morning, watching and watching, and that's the thing, you know, when you're doing this kind of fishing, you've got to be on your rod when you're weed fishing. You've got to fish with a tight clutch. You don't want the fish to go very far. This fish, literally, it travelled no more than 2 rod lengths throughout the course of the battle. And strength is the most important thing. You know, I've got 20 pound subline on, and I've got a drop off lead, very, very important. So if you fish strong, then you should be all right. The key is not to let the fish take too much line. You're fishing in weed. You see a lot of people at night fishing in weedy lakes, and they'll zip the bivvy door down, they'll have a load of looseness on their clutch, so the fish sometimes can take 20-30 yards before they even got to the rod. Further it goes in weed, the less chance you've got of landing it. So fish tight. I'll lock it right up so you just pull, and just as the line begins to come off, as the rod begins to move, so it really has to work. This guy's just having a breather, he's completely fine there, he's immersed in water. I'm going to strip this weed away, we'll get him on the mat, and see what we caught. I don't think it's very big, but I don't care at the moment. Okay, good angling practice, guys. Wherever you're fishing, get everything ready before you get the fish out, so you're not faffing around while it's lying on the mat. I'm going to wet the sling now, use that to wet the mat, zero the sling, get everything ready to weigh the fish. He's a little bit bigger than I thought, it might be over 20 pounds, so a lovely black carp. So I'll get everything ready and we'll have a look at him. Now that's what I'm talking about. They don't come much better than that in my book. Old, black, gnarly, pretty angry too. But who can blame him? I'm sorry I've upset your morning, mate. Just under 19 pounds, North Lake mirror carp, single balanced tiger nut in the edge. I'll show you that rig later on the 6-foot rod, which allows me to get right in these tiny little places. It's not snaggy or dangerous, it's just a lot easier than wielding a 12-foot rod. And I never travel without it. So this is the fruit of my work. Just when I was at the bottom of depression, thinking nothing was going to happen, Simon and I have been texting each other, saying which tree should we hang ourselves from, and this fella came along. So let's hope we can make another chance, but you know, it saved the blank, that's the main thing, because we could easily have blanked here. So I'm going to go back to the swim and reassess things. In the meantime, I'm going to send this little fella on his way. Over the moon with that. Oh yeah. Okay, I'm going to show you the rig, how I construct it, the rig that I just used to catch that fabulous 19 pound North Lake mirror carp. It's a balanced Tigernut rig, as I mentioned, so the key points, again, as I said, are strength. So I'm going to use a 30 pound coated hook link material. It's a very soft, supple one. Strip the end off and tie. I strip about 4 inches and then tie an overhand loop knot in the end, which is going to be the hair, normal knotless knot style, like so. Just trim the end of that. Because we're doing this marginal fishing on very small, hard, clear spots, I'm going to use a big lead and a short hook link. So we don't need too much material. I'll cut that back at about 8 inches to give us enough to tie. Next I'm going to take a very small piece of silicone tube, just cut about 2 millimeters of that and slide it onto the end of the, there, down to there, so that it's sitting up against the loop. Next you need a hook. This is a prototype hook, the brainchild of Tom Dove. Hasn't even got a name yet, but we've all been playing around with it and testing it. It's very, very unique, unusual shape. Doesn't really look like any other hook that I've ever seen. So we're going to use one of those, and we're going to whip it on normal knotless knot fashion. So through the back of the hook, get the small piece of silicone and slide it over the point. Being careful not to nick the braid, like so. Okay, and I like the silicone to trap the hair pretty much opposite the point, like that. We're going to be fishing a single tiger nut, so we don't need a very long hair. That will be ample. Okay, and we're just going to whip that off, knotless knot style as I said. After you've done 5 or 6 turns, you want it so that you have about 10-15 mil of uncoated below the eye of the hook. That's the finished rig. Very simple. You've got a lovely flexible bit by the hook, and then a slightly stiffer main section which will alleviate tangles in normal fishing circumstances, but really for this sort of situation its purpose is durability. That plastic coating over the braid gives you a total toughness, dealing with weedy situations and possibly big fish that is absolutely paramount. So toughness and strength are key here. So that's the rig. And then take a tiger nut and a nut drill and carefully bore a hole into the nut, which is going to receive a small piece of cork. Slide it on the end of the needle, take your tiger nut and push the needle through the middle of the nut so it exits the other side, and then you're just going to push that plug into the nut like so, which will create a critically balanced bait. And put that straight onto the hair. Next I'll put on a hair stop. Nice small discreet little hair stop like that. And that is the finished rig. Now what I do is I test this in the water, trimming away nut or cork accordingly until the hook sits flat and the nut just hovers above it. And that's going to be attached to this great beast. It's a 5-ounce inline lead, and that's fished on about 6 or 7 feet of very soft, supple cable lead core. You'll notice straight away that this is set up drop-off style. And what I've done to facilitate that, I have a tail rubber here, and at the other end, spliced onto the leader, I have a ring swivel. And all you do is you attach the end of the lead core to the eye of the swivel, not the ring, and then you put the barrel of the swivel into the lead like that, and then your leader simply runs around the outside of the lead and is held on only by the tail rubber, like so. And what happens in weed, it pulls apart, the rubber comes off, the swivel comes out, and the lead comes off, which makes fish a lot easier to land. So that's the rig, the good old drop-off inline, which is going to be tied to this 3 or 4 inches of hook link, tiny little balanced tiger nut, and that's the rig that's caught me the fish today. And it's a rig that I've used for margin fishing for many years. It works really well. There's a lovely little dot island just to my right, and it's got a beautiful gravel shelf. Seen fish using it, and I want to get a bait right up on the top of the shelf. It's a spot that you can't actually cast to from here, so I'm going to use a little trick to get the rig into position. I've got a rod here with just a light 1.5 ounce lead. And what I've done just now is I've been out onto the island and I've positioned my baiting spoon floating on the surface of the water parallel to where I'm standing. And that gives me something to flick this lead over. And once I've got that cast over there, I'm going to go around, pick the lead up, and I'll show you the next stage. Okay, that was perfect. Now I'm just going to put the rod on the alarm. Make sure it's switched off. I'm going to tighten up just enough to take up the slack. And then I'm going to open the clutch right up. You've got enough slack so that when I get round there I can bring the lead in to hand. Don't want loads of slack line, but at the same time I want to have some control over the line. I'll show you what I mean next. I'm going to go around and get the lead. Okay, I've come round, I've got a bucket of bait. I've got the rig ready to go. I'm just going to retrieve the lead that I've cast. There you can see just tip the water out the spoon. Makes things a bit easier. There we go. Okay. And now we have the lead that we tied on earlier. We're just going to cut that off. And we're going to attach our actual rig, which is the same one I showed you earlier. Big drop-off inline lead. 5-turn grinner knot to the end of that leg core leader, which I've spliced a loop into. Okay, so we've got the rig and the leader attached to the fishing rod that's back in the swim, and what we're going to do is use the spoon to position that onto the gravel spot. I've got a tiny little notch that I've cut out the front edge of the spoon, but that just pops in there like that, and then holding the line taut, you use the spoon. I'm just going to drop my Polaroids down so I can see everything on the bottom, like so. There we go. Keep that line straight and taut, and then extend the hook link, and then just drop the lead to the left of the hook link, because I've been watching the carp, they've been coming from the right of the swim, so that's perfect, as you'd expect. Excellent. Yateley North Lake really sums up to me what is special about carp fishing, and it conjures up that sort of magic and mystery that sometimes gets lost on the more commercialised waters that a lot of the time we spend fishing these days. It's weedy, it's overgrown, it's got that tangible atmosphere that you get on some lakes, and it reminds me very much of what led me into carp fishing in the first place. And I can remember cycling down misty lanes at 4 o'clock in the morning with my rod strapped to the crossbar of my grifter, and off down to the River Stort to do a bit of gudgeon fishing. You know, through my sort of early teenage years, that was carp fishing. Summer holidays, a jar of maggots, and a rod and a rucksack and some egg mayonnaise sandwiches, and off you went. Everything changed for me in 1984 when I saw that picture. Really, Richard MacDonald holding Basil did the same for my generation that Dick Walker and Clarissa did, I guess, in 1952. And from that moment I wanted to be a carp angler, and I wanted to catch a fish that was too big to even lift up. And the days changed from going down the river with maggots to strapping a float rod to my bike and going off and trying to catch carp with it. And you know, fantastically undergunned and under-equipped, and without a clue really, but they were happy, halcyon summer days spent chasing carp on misty little reed-fringed lakes, dapping floating crust and so on. And always in the back of my mind, that picture inspired me and led me on. And I suppose little did I know that almost 30 years on, I would be back, or I would be at the place where that actually happened, where that fish used to live. And it's led me a nostalgic journey. Being here, it's led me a chance to reflect on my early days carp fishing and what it's meant to me. And I think lakes like this, you know, they're few and far between. Lakes that are left to be overgrown, that don't have any proper swims, where there aren't too many rules, where the anglers all get on with each other and pass on little tips and secrets. Yeah, this is proper carp fishing, and I'm definitely going to come back. As you can see, I brought the rods in, they're leaning on the bivvy. I've been walking up and down all afternoon. It's the end of day 2, and I've been walking up and down trying to work out where to go. When I arrived in this swim to start with, there were fish here in abundance, out in the weed, backs breaking, tenting up and so on. It's looking pretty devoid and dead now. However, there are fish about 4 or 5 swims further down the lake to my right, and there's a silty hole that they seem to be congregating around. I flicked a lead in there this morning after I saw them there. It was smooth, clean, just as a backup option. I wanted to have an idea what was there. And whilst I was there, I put in about 200 boilies with a catapult. And I thought I'd just keep an eye on that, because it's always worth another iron in the fire, and I thought if they get on it, I'll see them fizzing. I've just been down for a look, and there's lines of fizz all over the spot, so fantastic news. I've got fish feeding on a backup area. I've got itchy feet. There's not many fish here. We've got one night left to play for. I'm going to up camp. I'm going to move down there and see if I can bag a carp tonight. Good morning. You join me on the final day. We've done 3 nights. It's been hard going, and then we knew it would be. The one bite we had has been very, very hard won, and nothing else has happened. We're both on fish. We both moved again last night, to a new area. I think we've fished 6 swims now between us, but you know, you've got to be on your toes and fish where the fish are, and they have been quite mobile. Now at the opposite end of the lake to where I first began, and there's numbers of fish here. Quiet night. We thought initially that perhaps action would come at night and then at dawn, but that hasn't been the case, and Simon will explain why later on when he talks about oxygen levels, which has been a real eye-opener for me. As it is, it's looking really good for a daytime bite. I've recast the rods. They're right on the money. I've got fish fizzing over my spot right now. I'm looking furtively, glancing up at the spot, and the left-hand rod is on, and there are fish there now. So both spots are covered. One's on the corner of an island, the other one is a silty hole. There's fish visiting between each area. I'm boilie fishing, nice and accurate, clipped up, holes in the weed, and in between recasting I've gone round and primed probably 7 or 8 margin spots around the lake, so they will be checked every hour or so. I'll leave Simon to watch the rods, and I'll be off checking those to see if anything comes in. So last few hours of the session, all to play for.
So here we are, third day, third new swim. Although the bay looked quite good yesterday and I definitely had fish feeding in front of me, this looked like a better option yesterday evening, so I've come around here. I'm on the riverbank side of the lake, one swim down from Adam. I'm fishing a channel out in the weed with both rods. I put about 50 to 100 boilies out in the channel yesterday, so fingers crossed for something during the day. I'm also going to bait up a couple of margin spots down this bank, which is nice and deep, and see if I can't get a couple of fish coming in. So fingers crossed that I can catch one on the third and final day. Okay, what I'd like to do now is run you through the rigs that I'm using here at the Yateley North Lake. As we've already discussed on the programme, it's a very, very weedy lake. A couple of the swims I fished are almost like a lawn or a football pitch. So to counteract that, I've gone in with a relatively big hook. I'm using a size 4 wide-gate patterned hook. It's a strong hook, it's sharp, and it does mean that if I can hook a fish, there's a very good chance of getting it back through the weed. Yes, you could say you might sacrifice a bite or two because you're using a bigger hook, but I feel it's important to land the fish if we hook one. I've coupled that up with a soft coated braid hook link. This will hopefully blend with the contours of the lake bed and lie relatively smooth across any detritus on the bottom. To create the rig, what I've done is I've stripped back 15 centimetres of the hook link. I've put a little loop in the end to create the hair, and then I've tied a knotless knot onto the shank of the hook. And then very importantly, to finish that off, I put the hook link down through the eye towards the point and out. So that creates a very basic knotless knot. And then to that I've added a piece of shrink tube about 1 centimetre long, which I've threaded up the hook link and over the eye. As I've steamed that, I've put a little bit of a bend in it, and it's now stiffened up and it's pointing down slightly to create a nice curve to the shank. So hopefully create a hook that's going to turn over in the fish's mouth as it moves away once it's picked the bait up. Now, as I mentioned, this is the rig I'm using. What I'm going to do is couple it with 2 different approaches. I've used it with sweet corn in the first swim I was in, the very weedy swim 2. A really basic little stack of sweet corn. I've got 2 grains of plastic corn sandwiching 2 golden grains of normal sweet corn in the middle, and that creates hopefully a nice bait presentation that just takes the weight of the hook, so it'll sit up on the bed of the lake. The hook will lie flat. I really like the hook to lie flat, but I want to have some of the weight of the hook taken out, so that's going to sit like that on the bottom, and hopefully if the fish picks it up, in it goes, and the hook's in the prone position ready to catch the fish's mouth. So that's the sweet corn presentation. Now with the boilies, when I've been fishing in this swim, I've been using Atlantic Heat fish meal boilies, really good quality fish meal boilie, and to sort of fish over the top of that, I'm using a hardened hook bait, a bottom bait, and I'm topping that off with a 12mm cork dust pop-up. And that should create a basic snowman setup, something like that on the bottom. Again, I want the hook to lie flat on the floor, and I want the bait to be sitting just above it like that. So if the fish sucks at it, it's sucked up off the bed of the lake relatively easily, and then the hook should be sitting in the prone position to catch the fish. So fingers crossed, I've got my traps out there. Let's see what the day brings us.
As always, when I go fishing with Mr. Carp, I learn something new, and this session has been no different. It's a never-ending mine of information. On this occasion, Simon's informed me why carp feed at certain times, the effect that weed has on them, and how it affects their digestion process. And it's all down to oxygen, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Adam.
So what's going on? You've got a gadget.
I have brought a gadget with me to help me show you, because it's all well and good saying this is weed and it's photosynthesising in the lake. But
What?
Photosynthesising. You remember school?
No.
This thing is an oxygen meter, and it tells you the oxygen reading in the water. As a fishery manager, as a fish farmer, and myself, and a fishery manager, this is an absolutely essential piece of kit, because if you're in the business of rearing fish or managing lakes, you need to know what the oxygen content of the water is. But as a fisherman, it's also a fantastic insight into the fish's behaviour. And in a lake like the lake here, North Lake at Yateley, we're getting something called a diurnal rhythm. We're getting quite a big diurnal rhythm. And what that means is, through the course of the night, up to first light, the plants, and there's a lot of plant life in this lake, is respiring, and it's sucking oxygen out of the water. Additionally, all the rotting leaves and debris on the bottom of the lake is also sucking up oxygen through it as it's being broken down by bacteria, and that results in a very low oxygen level at the end of the night. So at first light.
So during that process, is the weed expelling anything? Is that a myth?
No, it's sucking up oxygen and producing carbon dioxide.
Right.
And the result is you get pH changes, but we won't worry about that for now. We'll talk about the oxygen. As we go through the night, the oxygen level in the lake is going down and down and down. If it keeps going to a point, it could result in a summer fish kill, which you will have heard about.
Yeah.
You get a big thunderstorm in the summer and bang, suddenly you've got dead fish. And I've taken readings in the North Lake in the last couple of days, and we've got readings down to about 30% saturation. So that means the water is holding only 30% of the oxygen it can hold. And that equates into an amount of oxygen of about 2.5 milligrams of oxygen per litre.
Right, okay.
If you're a carp, to be efficient in your digestion, you need approximately 5 milligrams of oxygen per litre. So the carp are not going to want to feed in the later part of the night and into first light, because there's very little oxygen about. So they're going to be worrying about oxygen. We're terrestrial animals, and they'll get up in the morning and worry about oxygen.
Yeah,
it's just there. You take it for granted, but for a fish, it's an absolutely vital part of their lives to move around the lake to make sure they're in the most comfortable position in terms of the oxygen that's available to them for their life processes and also their digestion. This is a very weedy lake, so what we found is first light, the oxygen's very low, 30% saturation.
That's the lowest point, first light.
First light, the last 2 mornings it's been 28% saturation and 32 or thereabouts.
And then what happens?
And then as all the plant life in this lake starts to photosynthesise.
Due to the sun hitting it?
Yep, it's sucking up carbon dioxide and it's producing oxygen in the presence of sunlight, and you get the oxygen coming up quite steeply.
So the process actually reverses.
Yeah, and what we're finding in this lake at the moment with this very, very heavy weed growth is that we're actually reaching levels of 160% saturation. Now that sounds a bit strange, because your maths teacher would have told you that 100% is as high as you can go. The water is actually holding more oxygen than it can physically hold. So much photosynthesis going on, so much oxygen being produced that the water becomes super saturated.
Right, okay.
And there's actually oxygen trying to get out of the surface, but the plants are producing it faster than it can diffuse from the surface. From a fish's point of view, happy days.
Right.
So they've had a feed maybe in the first few hours of daylight, and then they can sit up in the weed with a gut full of food, and the oxygen level is 160% saturated, and that equates to about maybe 14 or 15 milligrams of oxygen per litre. So we've got a shift from late afternoon of maybe 14 or 15 milligrams of oxygen to first light when we're down to 2 milligrams of oxygen. It's a huge amount of oxygen change. So for a fish, they're going to feel that. That affects their lives, how they go about their feeding.
So as an angler, how could you use that to revitalize? I mean, if let's say you got hold of an oxygen meter like this.
This would cost about £300.
Oh,
so it's quite an expensive bit of kit to get.
I'll borrow that if you don't mind. but putting that into layman's terms, you know, and as an angler, if you wanted to use that information to help you, I suppose, if you're of limited time, then would you be more inclined to fish?
Target your fishing to certain
when the
periods
oxygen's
of the
high,
day.
when the fish are most active, when they can digest.
At this time of year, often quick overnighters. You know, it's a nice idea, and there's been guys coming down here and doing quick overnighters. But both the chaps I've met while we've been here have said, well, the bites have been coming sort of not at first light, but a couple of hours later, sort of 7:30 when they're packing up to go. And you know, that's because the fish are responding to that oxygen coming up. Obviously, odd fish will get caught through the night. You know, it's not the fish haven't read the rules, and there are areas
and they adjust to it anyway.
Yeah, and there are areas of this lake that are clearer than others. And if they're in those clear areas, then that effect isn't going to be so steep. So it is, you know, to think about oxygen and what's happening around the lake definitely gives you a better insight into the fish's feeding.
Excellent, thank you very much, Mr. Carp. Fascinating as ever. We've got about an hour left to go on this session. The clock is ticking away. We've got all fingers crossed. Well, Mr. Carp.
It's been a tricky one.
Simon has fished out of his skin and really deserved a carp, let me tell you. He's feeling a little bit beaten because he's been working his socks off. And it's his first ever thinking tackle blank, but I pointed out to him, I've had them, Danny's had them, Daryl's had them. They come along sooner or later, especially when you put your neck on a line on a tough lake like this. Nothing's been caught really for a week or so. A blank was on the cards really. We fluked out one, lucky capture, but you know, I think the way Simon's fished and probably the way I've fished, you know, if the fish had been having it, perhaps in September rather than August, or no excuses, but
no, bad workman, bad workman. Blame the weed, blame the trees. I don't know.
So, what have you learned? How would you fish it different next time?
I think, yeah, firstly, it's been a fantastic place to come and fish for 3 days, isn't it? What beautiful scenery, really fantastically atmospheric lake.
Felt quite homey, have you?
Yeah, really. And there's, you know, it's steeped in history to sit here and fish swims like this one with you know, famous landmarks where we know historical big fish have been caught. It's been great. But it's been frustrating. How would we do it differently next time? Well, I guess, yeah, maybe PVA bags, solid bags in the weed. We talked about that.
Because they've been feeding in the weed, haven't they?
They have been, and there's been a lot of fizzing. Our bottom baits have come back a bit tainted by the silt, so maybe I've been fishing in dirty gullies and should have been up on the gravel. It's hard to know where that is without doing a bit of plumbing, and with a weed that's pretty difficult.
Yeah, I think if I was going to come back next time, I would get the marker rod. I'd put a big lead on it, a 5-ounce one, and I would cast around because apparently the lake is full of features.
Well, definitely. Having seen it drained, it was incredibly up and down.
So, you know, I think if I could, once that lead would go through, you'd feel it down through the water, and if you kept casting around, you would feel shallower features. And if I found one, then I would clip up, bring it in, either pace it out or put a bag on that rod, and then punch it through. So not only have I fished through the weed, but onto a feature as well. And I think that would catch them.
The other thing that the guys we've met, the 2 lads that fished on the point when I was there, they've obviously been applying a good quality bait to a spot regularly, and that's something we didn't, you know, it's coming on for 3 days and 3 nights. It's tricky to achieve that, but they've been doing it regularly for a few weeks and they've caught well. So, you know. Which
is something that the guys watching this can apply to their fishing. You know, if you're on your little syndicate lake or something and you're trying to find an edge, then pre-baiting and baiting up is something that not many people do.
No, and we both know how effective it can be if you get it right.
Even and it needn't be expensive.
No, and even on big sparsely stocked waters that applies. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can bait up.
Hemp.
Yeah, Vitalin, you know, pigeon conditioner. You can get relatively cheap bait that fish love and be applying it.
Yeah, so. Get them feeding confidently on those spots, and that will also clear away the weed from the spot, won't it?
Yeah, and the silt and debris on the bottom.
Yeah. Okay. Any other things you'd do if you came back? Because I might bring you back for another show.
Oh, good. I look
Let
forward
you
to
loose
that.
on them again.
I think the one thing that I'm not sure we've covered is with the weed being this thing, very important to lose the lead. I didn't catch a fish to show the setup I was using in terms of the breakaway, but if you get a fish on in this weed, you want to be rid of the lead as soon as possible. I think that's vitally important, and anybody watching the programme who hasn't fished lakes like this should be aware of that, and if they do go to fish them, make sure that they're using a clip set up so the lead can jettison.
20-pound line?
Yeah, we've both used 20-pound line.
Tight clutches?
Yep.
And be on your rods and be vigilant. So another fascinating programme. I love fishing with Mr. Carp. It's always entertaining and I always learn plenty. So we've come away really very lucky with one fish. We really could easily have ended with nothing. But we put it on the line. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll be both back together somewhere else, somewhere new, with another challenge sometime in the future. Thanks for coming, Simon.
No worries, Adam. Thanks for having me.